One continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
At 9:08, we go straight to our top story this hour now. African leaders announcing their aim to offer a global model for tackling the climate crisis through green investments in the wake of the United States withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. The decision by Washington has negatively impacted funds towards the fight against climate change. The continent, which has been buffeted by landslides, floods and droughts this year, is holding the second Africa Climate Summit in Ethiopia, seeking a common voice before the global climate talks in Brazil, the COP30. That summit is to take place as I mentioned, in Brazil. Speaking at the opening of the summit, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said the situation is dire, adding that the leaders are negotiating for their survival in order to design the world's next climate economy. For more on what has to come out of the summit, if it's to be a success, we're joined now by Greenpeace Africa Responsive Campaigns lead, Amos Wemanya. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, as we mentioned, this discussion, the talks in Ethiopia coming at a critical time ahead of the COP30 summit for African leaders. How are they interpreting the latest events, even though they may have been foreseen?
The thing is, we are living in challenging geopolitical times, and this provides Africa an opportunity to provide this global leadership that's needed in addressing the world's most challenging crisis in the name of climate change. We know our continent is disproportionately affected with the climate impacts, but it is great that African leadership is gathering here in Addis to be able to design and build on what already was achieved 2 years ago at the first Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi. This Addis Summit provides us a great opportunity, provides African leadership a great opportunity to be able to design mechanisms that will make Africa food sovereign, that will make Africa to have electricity to the more than 600 million Africans that do not have electricity. The Nairobi Declaration actually had a clear imperative for us that we need to reconcile climate action and development. If we are to do that, the outcomes of the Addis Summit, this summit that's taking place here in Ethiopia, are very important in enabling Africa to unlock its massive potential.
And we saw a report back by Kenya's leader on some of the highlighted shortfalls in clean energy and infrastructure, decline in manufacturing capacity. Can you just give us a high-level summary of what was then discussed around that?
Yeah, the thing is that from Nairobi, the African leaders set themselves a target of achieving 300 gigawatts of installed capacity of renewable energy by 2030. This has faced some challenges in terms of financing because we still have much of the financing coming to the continent going into wrong energy systems that are fossil fuels that have led us to this crisis. So there is need for us to shift the financing from fossil industry to energy systems that are going to empower our continent, that are going to make sure that the communities that are facing climate impacts are able to build resilience. And abundant renewable energies on the continent are not just resources, they are Africa's lifelines. If we invest in them, they are able to unlock the potential for communities to, for example, build resilience when we have droughts that are ravaging their livelihood.
And as we mentioned that the objective really is to be at the forefront of a global model that will help particularly the global south be at the forefront, as they are the most impacted of a climate economy. But we're still very much shut out if we talk about participation in global value chains. What is holding us back? What has been identified as the most immediate areas to prioritize in rebuilding this global model?
The thing is that for a very long time, Africa has played the role of servicing the interests of others. It is important that Africa establishes its own agenda and be able to service the agenda that fits into providing for the people's needs, providing for people's healthcare, providing for people's everyday needs. And this summit provides that space for African leaders to shift. This is a turning point for African leadership, that we need to establish a vision that will help Africa not just to play the role that was designed for it by the colonial structures, but a new role that puts Africa at the forefront of finding solutions to global challenges, not just servicing the interests of others and playing at the bottom of the value chain.
And a big part of that is, which was declared in Nairobi, is that Africa is seeking to be essential part of the cog in the wheel of clean technology, of processing more raw materials for production, to make production sustainable. Is this something that they believe, the African leaders, that is, they'll be given space to do that, given the fact that with trade tariffs and the unilateral manner in which the United States has been dealing with this, and it's saying particularly why, because it feels that the global south, even as part of BRICS, is actually trying to undermine not only America's economic system, but the dollar as king, as the US president says.
You see, if we are to deal with the climate crisis and also development challenges that are facing Africa, we need to approach this in a holistic manner. We need to actually correct the global financial architecture that undermines Africa's prosperity. And African group has been at the forefront of proposing these solutions. For example, it is the African group that took to the UN the agenda to have a UN tax convention. This is a framework that is going to help establish new global tax rules that are inclusive, that are democratic, that are fair, that are going to help Africa unlock the much needed resources for investing in the sectors and investing in initiatives that are going to help the continent prosper. We have also seen initiatives being launched at various other forums, including the first Africa Climate Summit, where we had accelerated partnership for renewables being launched. Some of these initiatives have not been adequately funded. So this summit needs to provide that direction, that vision that will fund these initiatives that African countries are already engaged in, that are going to help our continent not just deal with the climate challenge, but also deal with the development challenges that we've been facing.
And as you say, this would mean a dismantling of, just the global structural barriers that exist. So what would be the first hurdle if we are to tackle the headwinds that Africa faces in a manner that is not only progressive, but, as you say, holistic?
This summit needs to actually rehash Africa's positions, for example, on tax and climate. This process provides an opportunity for Africa to establish itself with processes that will help the continent to curb things such as illicit financial flows, the bleeding that happens on the continent, bleeding of resources, exploitation and extraction. So African leaders in this summit need to restate these positions and emphasize, reaffirm the need for these processes to establish plans that will help Africa to be able to unlock the resources that are needed for our prosperity.
And what would be the keystones of ensuring that there is quality, accessible and affordable finance? Because in some cases there has been criticism of the manner which it's been packaged, especially the deals between the West and the global South, the global North and the global South.
There is a superpower on the continent, and Africa's superpower is its unity. Africa countries, African leaders need to unite and speak in one voice, need to present a common vision, a common agenda that to the rest of the world, and be able to attract the much needed cooperation on African terms. This can only be achieved if we establish a common African agenda that is going to drive our engagement, that's going to drive the continent's cooperation with others, and that's going to service the needs of the African people. And this includes protecting Africa's important resources, including forests and life support systems that have sustained the continent for a very long time.
So where would be the first step, and also taking into account a national interest, even though we are working towards regional unity, when we talk about concessional financing?
The thing is, the challenges that face African countries are common. Issues of debt distress. Many African countries, as we speak today, are in debt distress. So we cannot afford to speak from national level. We need to come together because the challenges that we are faced with, the climate crisis, the climate impacts, are happening across the continent. This is not just a one country affair. So African leaders need to shelve national interests and forge a common unified agenda that is going to help the continent to engage effectively in multilateral processes.
Mm-hmm. What has happened so far within the Global South that would be exemplary of what the Ethiopian meeting is trying to cobble together to present as a global model within these confines that we're talking about that would be acceptable?
Yeah, the thing is, what has happened recently is African group together with other global South groups are coming together. They are uniting and they are having a common goal. We might recall last year at the COP29 in Baku, they had a common goal on what kind of financing is needed for the continent. Not debt, but financing that is able to help communities that are suffering impacts that they have not contributed to be able to address these challenges. So this unity has been demonstrated in other processes before. Like I already mentioned, there is unity already in the UN Tax Convention conversations, and this should continue even at COP30, where our leaders need to continue pressing for quality financing mechanisms that will help our communities to be resilient. And that is, there has to be a consensus on meeting the 1.3 trillion needs that has been put forward that will help the continent to be able to finance essential services that will help us to survive in this era that we are in, that we are shuttling between disasters.
I mean, we have seen countries like Nigeria, Namibia, Zimbabwe banning export of unprocessed minerals. Is that a good first step in these negotiations, or is it going to be seen as hardline?
There is already a good step with countries that you've already mentioned, but also the Africa mineral strategy needs to emphasize the need for Africans to be able to use its resources for the benefit of the people, but also safeguard the ecology that has been key in sustaining communities. For example, I already mentioned, as we use the resources that we have on the continent, such as green minerals, in the transition process for our benefit, we need also to safeguard ecosystems where these minerals are found. Because when we destroy these ecosystems, we actually be shooting ourselves in the foot. So we need to protect the Congo Basin, for example. We need to protect the rights of the indigenous people that have been stewards of this ecosystem.
But how do we measure the success or intended success on this in terms of a value add? Some argue that the impact may be limited. It may be seen more as a symbolic gesture as opposed to local value addition.
The thing is that we are facing challenges on the continent. We have over 600 million people without electricity. So success metrics will be measured by how we are able to achieve the sustainable development goals for our people. Energy access being one of them, safeguarding people's health, making sure that the climate is stable for communities to thrive. So we can only measure successes through the way we attain the 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
And the AU Missions 300, its estimation, at least in terms of what they believe is achievable in providing electricity. It's 300 million people by 2030. Are those goalposts going to move, though, given the fact that populations also continue to grow? But it's just, 5 years away. So it's not too much of a population growth explosion, but just generally the challenges that they will face to meet this vow. Could it be tempered by unforeseen challenges that are not factored into the plan?
The thing is, the mission 300 to power 300 million Africans by 2030 is an ambitious mission that requires concrete steps. And that is why this Addis Summit needs to provide those concrete steps to achieving this. And we have the potential to do that. The challenge that we've been facing is the financing. And if we can make the polluters, the people and the corporations that have got us into this chaos to pay for their climate plunder, we are able to harness the much needed resources that can be invested in reaching this goal. So we need to make the polluters pay. We need to tax extreme wealth, the super rich that have accumulated extreme wealth by plundering and destroying our climate.
And final word to African leaders as they push through from COP30 to G20 in November. What should be a non-negotiable, or at least be caution political language that would suggest that without movement on these commitments, it cannot be then described as an African-designed global climate plan?
Yeah, to the African leaders, this is not a moment for distraction. We have seen some of the false solutions and distractions, dangerous distractions that have been presented on the continent, such as carbon market schemes that are actually auctioning our communities. We need to stay focused. We need to differentiate between real solutions and false solutions and make a decision that is in the best interest of the African people and the African ecosystem.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate your time and your insights. And we're talking here about what's happening now in Addis Ababa. That is, African leaders, they are meeting to discuss the climate crisis and to offer a new global model for tackling it from an African perspective. This after the United States has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement. So they are meeting at the moment in Addis Ababa ahead of the climate talks in Brazil, the COP30 summit. That they're speaking to us was Greenpeace Africa Responsive Campaigns Lead Amos Wemanya. And it brings the time to 26 minutes past 9.